Upon revisiting Denis Villeneuve's filmography, I noticed a striking similarity between two films of his, Sicario and Enemy. You might be wondering, what could that similarity be? One is starkly enigmatic and non-linear, while the other follows a more conventional structure, both thematically deviating into other concepts. Well, interestingly enough, they both share the same structural ending. They both fall into the cyclical narrative. But what exactly is a cyclical narrative? Not to be confused with a circular narrative, which entails a story that ends where it began, revisiting a location or line of dialogue that was prefaced at the start. They aren't mutually exclusive structures, but the cyclical narrative is a cycle that repeats itself. Think of the Three Little Pigs. The first pig builds a house out of straw, only for it to be blown down by the big bad wolf. The second pig builds a house out of wood, only for it to be once again destroyed by the wolf, all eventually culminating with the third pig that builds a house out of bricks. You know how the story goes. I think they managed to kill the wolf, but there's been many different iterations of this fairy tale. In Sicario, the cyclicality is portrayed through Emily Blunt's character, Kate, as she tries again and again to work within the parameters of her own ideals and ethics, attempting to operate by the book, while Matt and Alejandro constantly refuse to do so. When we reach the end of the film, Alejandro confronts Kate with a piece of paper that he wants her to sign.
I need you to sign this piece of paper. It basically says that everything we did was done by the book.
It would essentially exonerate them of all the crimes they committed, with Kate's signature ensuring that they did everything by the book. The dilemma that she is faced with is a choice between dying or giving up her last bit of leverage and letting these guys get away with everything that unfolded over the course of the film. It's a brilliant scene, and it poses a question to the audience. What would you do in this situation? Signing off would restart the cycle, but dying might put an end to it, although there's no certainty of that. Of course, as we know, Kate signs the paper. One mode of control was destroyed when Alejandro killed Alacon, but now another one replaces it.
What you saw up there was Alejandro working toward returning that order.
Alejandro works for the fucking Colombian cartel. He works for the competition.
The cycle of drugs and corruption continues, just in another person's hands. Along with this plotline, there exists another story interwoven within Sicario that also uses this narrative device. Throughout the film, our attention is occasionally called to a subplot involving Silvio and his son. For some time, it's seemingly inconsequential, but this story eventually converges with the main one, when Silvio, who also happens to be a policeman, is found assisting in Alacon's drug trafficking operation. Alejandro kills Silvio after using him to get to Alacon, the man that killed Alejandro's wife and daughter. This is a cycle of revenge. An eye for an eye, if you will. We know an entire family is killed to even the score. But how is this cyclical? Well, in the process of Alejandro evening the score, he leaves a boy fatherless. A boy that may just grow up harboring the same resentment and adopting the same life mission, seeking to avenge his father's death. Will Silvio's son continue the cycle? We don't know for sure. And that's part of the effectiveness of Sicario. Denis and screenwriter Taylor Sheridan use ambiguity as a driving force, both moral ambiguity with each character and interpretive ambiguity with how the film concludes, which is why I'll probably never watch the sequel to Sicario, as I believe the film is perfect on its own. Then there's Enemy, which is one of Denis' most puzzling films. Unpacking all of its intricacies could be a video on its own, so to summarize, it's essentially a film about infidelity and commitment. It's not meant to be taken literally, but rather allegorically. Throughout the runtime, Jake Gyllenhaal's character is attempting to reform and come to grips with his commitment issues, manifesting in a splitting of personas. By the end of the film, just when he seems to have finally conquered his unfaithfulness and fear of commitment, allured by the key to the sex club, he gives in to temptation, thus repeating the cycle. So it's not only a structural component, but also a thematic one.
And it's important to remember this, that this is a pattern that repeats itself throughout history.
Jake's character is a bit of a cheater, cycling through infidelity because he feels stuck in a cycle of marital commitment and mundanity. The tragedy of the film is his relapse and failure to break the cycle. In both films, there are implied events that happen before the film starts, and there are implied events that take place after the film ends. In Sicario, it's the killing of Alejandro's family that happens before, and the path to revenge that Silvio's son will take that happens after. In Enemy, it is the habitual infidelity that happens before, and the continuation of infidelity that happens after, cycling from start to finish and then onward into perpetuity. So what makes the cyclical narrative so effective? And why does Denis seem to be so drawn to it? Well, he isn't the first to do it. Films like La Haine, Bicycle Thieves, and Chinatown all make use of this tool. So, brief spoiler warning for those 3 titles. Skip to this timestamp if you haven't seen them. La Haine is an example of a film that uses both the circular and cyclical narrative. The beginning is prefaced with a monologue that is repeated at the end when the 3 protagonists return home, once again encountering a cop that appeared in the first act of the film. This is the circular narrative. The cyclical is the death of Vince, repeating the cycle of senseless violence. A gunshot happens off-screen with no certainty of who pulled the trigger. It is one of the most riveting endings in any work of media ever. Hate breeds hate. Bicycle Thieves concludes with Antonio stealing a bike out of desperation, hopelessness, and pent-up frustration, the film portraying the cycle of crime and poverty. Poverty breeds crime. Chinatown, another film that is regarded as having one of the greatest endings ever, has no mercy for its characters. Evil triumphs with Noah Cross successfully walking away with his incest daughter to repeat the cycle once again. Jake's distrust and resentment is reinvigorated with this final moment.
Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown.
Every film mentioned in this video has something in common. They all leave the audience with an overwhelming feeling of despair by the end. When done right, this is the power of the cyclical narrative. Of course, film is meant to convey emotion, whether that be sadness, happiness, fear, or anger. In the case of these films, it is the hopelessness that becomes the driving emotional force. It's not really a fun feeling to have, but it is a thought-provoking one. The reason the cyclical narrative is so effective at conveying despair is because that feeling is innately ingrained in cycles. Nobody wants to be stuck in a loop where change seems impossible. Cycles cease control from us. It's like relapsing on an addiction. We witness in Sicario almost no resolution, just inherited motivation for revenge. Enemy restarts in the last few minutes of the film, just when it seems like the cycle has been broken. History repeating itself is a real phenomenon that evokes a sense of lost progress, but calling attention to it in art can allow us to acknowledge it and make meaningful change. That is why this narrative structure is so appealing. Denis actually takes this a step further with the film that was released after Sicario by subverting its pessimism in Arrival, creating a much more optimistic film with a story that breaks a cycle. He is easily one of the best filmmakers of this century, with his ability to tackle these unforgiving stories in a very human way. With that being said, you made it to the end of the video, so you might as well leave a like and you might as well subscribe. Also, feel free to sound off in the comments. What other films have you seen that fit the mold of the cyclical narrative? But yeah, thanks for watching.